For 6 straight years, the aviation world seemed locked into a predictable pattern. Airbus delivered more planes. Airbus took more orders. And Boeing, once the undisputed king of commercial aviation, appeared stuck in recovery mode, fighting one crisis after another. Analysts called the rivalry settled. Airlines adjusted their expectations. And many quietly assumed Boeing's best days were behind it. But in 2025, something happened that almost no one expected. While Airbus continued to lead in deliveries, Boeing quietly won the battle that matters most for the future. Orders, and not just barely. The shift was big enough that Airbus's own CEO was forced to admit an uncomfortable truth. Boeing may have already won the order race before the year even ends. So how did a company written off for nearly a decade suddenly flip the script? To understand why this moment matters, you have to rewind. For much of the past 6 years, the commercial aviation industry looked frozen in place. Airbus dominated annual deliveries, supported by the relentless output of the A320neo family. Boeing, meanwhile, stumbled through one setback after another, from production shutdowns to safety controversies that shattered airline confidence. The gap became so consistent that it stopped being debated. Airbus wasn't just winning, it was expected to win. And yet, beneath the surface, cracks were forming in that certainty. By late 2025, those cracks became impossible to ignore. Net aircraft orders, the metric that strips out cancellations and reflects true airline commitment, told a radically different story. Boeing surged ahead. While Airbus still posted hundreds of orders, Boeing's net performance overtook its rival for the first time in 6 years. Even more striking when looking at gross orders. The U.S. manufacturer crossed the 1,000 mark while Airbus remained below 800. This wasn't a rounding error. It was a reversal. And it forced the industry to ask a question it hadn't considered in years. Is Boeing actually back? The delivery numbers still seem to support the old narrative. Airbus had handed over more than 650 aircraft by late November, while Boeing remained just above 530. On paper, nothing had changed, but deliveries reflect the past. Orders shape the future. And airlines were suddenly voting with their wallets in a way few had predicted. That shift didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. To see how dramatic this reversal really is, you have to remember where Boeing was just a few years earlier. In the 1980s and 1990s, Boeing dominated commercial aviation. Even as Airbus grew, Boeing remained ahead in total deliveries for decades. That balance only began to tilt in the early 2000s when Airbus gained momentum in the narrow-body market. Still, Boeing held its own until everything unraveled in 2019. 2 fatal accidents involving the 730 MAX grounded the aircraft worldwide, triggering the most severe crisis in the company's history. Deliveries collapsed, trust evaporated, and Airbus surged ahead, not just catching Boeing, but passing it. From that moment on, the gap widened. Airbus delivered more aircraft every year. Its backlog exploded. By the early 2020s, it controlled roughly 2/3 of global aircraft orders. By 2023, Airbus aircraft outnumbered Boeing jets in active service for the first time ever. Boeing wasn't just losing, it was redefining survival, which is exactly why the 2025 reversal carries so much weight. One of the biggest reasons behind Boeing's resurgence is also one of the least dramatic. For years, the 737 MAX program was defined by uncertainty. Production stops, regulatory pressure, constant scrutiny. But in 2025, something quietly changed. For the first time since the crisis, Boeing operated the program with relative predictability. No headline-grabbing surges, no reckless ramp, just consistency. And for airlines, that mattered more than anything else. Confidence doesn't return with press releases. It returns when aircraft show up on time. As production stabilized, order momentum followed. By the third quarter of 2025, Boeing's monthly order growth jumped more than 160% year over year. Airlines that had frozen decisions for years suddenly re-engaged. Not because Boeing became perfect, but because it became reliable again. And that reliability unlocked something even more important. The real turning point didn't come from narrow-body jets at all. It came from wide-bodies. As global travel rebounded after the pandemic, demand didn't simply return to old patterns. It shifted. Airlines focused on long-haul routes, international expansion, and fuel efficiency. And that shift played directly into Boeing's strongest territory. The 787 Dreamliner and the long-delayed 777X suddenly became exactly what the market wanted. For years, the 777X was viewed with skepticism. Delays piled up, timelines slipped. Some wondered if the program would ever regain credibility. Then the orders arrived. Major ones. Emirates placed a massive commitment at the Dubai Air Show. Joined by China Airlines, two customers known for demanding the highest standards in performance and reliability. These weren't symbolic gestures. They were statements. And they reshaped the order landscape almost overnight. By October, Boeing's total orders had climbed past 800, the majority of them wide-body aircraft. Airbus, by contrast, continued to dominate narrow-body sales, but lagged significantly in wide-body demand. The difference revealed something deeper than preference. It exposed a timing advantage. Airbus's overwhelming success over the past decade had filled its backlog deep into the 2030s. For airlines needing aircraft sooner, that became a problem. Delivery slots suddenly mattered more than brand loyalty. Boeing, still recovering from past losses, had room. Airbus didn't. At the same time, persistent supply chain issues, especially engine shortages, forced Airbus to cut its delivery targets for the year. That adjustment didn't erase its dominance, but it softened enthusiasm just enough for Boeing to capitalize. The result wasn't just a numerical win. It was a psychological one. Investors noticed, airlines noticed, even Airbus leadership noticed. In a December interview, Airbus's CEO publicly acknowledged that Boeing was likely to win the annual order race. For an industry known for careful language, it was a rare admission, and it confirmed what the numbers already showed. The balance was shifting. Still, this comeback comes with limits. Boeing continues to trail Airbus in total deliveries and overall backlog. Supply chain constraints remain. Tariffs threaten to inflate costs. And ambitious production targets are far from guaranteed. Airbus, meanwhile, retains a commanding position in the narrow-body market and holds a backlog that secures production for more than a decade. This isn't a collapse. It's a cycle. What 2025 truly represents isn't victory or defeat. It's volatility. The rivalry that once felt predictable is alive again. Boeing didn't dethrone Airbus, but it proved something just as important. The gap can close. Momentum can shift, and the next chapter of commercial aviation will be more competitive, more intense, and far less certain than anyone expected just a few years ago. In the end, 2025 wasn't the year Boeing reclaimed the crown. It was the year the fight came back, and that may be the most important development of all. No press release followed. No carefully worded clarification appeared. No reassuring image was offered to soften the absence. And inside the monarchy, silence is never empty. It's strategic. According to royal commentators, the decision to say nothing was deliberate. Explaining Charlotte's absence would have required defining it, and defining it would have opened questions the palace wasn't ready to answer. Questions about influence, about consent, about who decides when a royal child is ready to step forward, and who decides when they are not. Instead, the institution chose the oldest tactic it knows. Let time absorb it, but time didn't erase the moment. It sharpened it. In the days that followed, aides began noticing subtle but unmistakable changes. Invitations involving the Wales children were reviewed more slowly. Language in briefings shifted. Words like expected were quietly replaced with considered. No one announced a policy change, but everyone behaved as though one had already taken effect. Royal watchers began to connect dots. They noted that Charlotte's public appearances became more carefully framed, that Catherine remained physically closer, that spontaneous interactions were favored over staged positioning. None of this was dramatic. That's what made it powerful. Inside Clarence's house, the atmosphere grew more restrained. Camilla continued her work, her schedule full, her demeanor unshaken. But those who've worked with her for years sensed the adjustment. She had learned long ago how to survive distance, how to maintain poise when the room subtly shifts away from her. Still, this distance felt different, because this time, it wasn't coming from the press, it was coming from within the family, according to reports. Charles struggled quietly with the situation. He had waited a lifetime to wear the crown, and his reign was already marked by recalibration. The monarchy was no longer rigid. It was learning, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, to bend. But bending around a child's emotional boundary, that was new. He understood Catherine's position. He also understood Camilla's vulnerability, and like many moments in modern monarchy, there was no perfect resolution. Only compromise through restraint. What followed wasn't a confrontation, it was something far more revealing. An absence of insistence. Camilla did not push for another appearance with Charlotte. No follow-up request surfaced. What few people outside the palace understood was how rare this moment truly was. Royal history is filled with children who were taught to endure first and understand later. Children who learned to smile before they learned to speak. Children whose discomfort was often reframed as duty and whose instincts were quietly corrected rather than honored. That's why this episode unsettled so many insiders, because it broke a pattern that had lasted generations. In the past, a child's unease would have been absorbed, redirected, or softened into compliance. This time, it wasn't. This time, the institution paused. And pauses inside the monarchy are never accidental. According to royal sources, the shift became most visible in the weeks that followed through what didn't happen. No attempt was made to reinsert Charlotte into a similar engagement. No alternative appearance was quietly scheduled to balance the absence. The palace did not seek a dover. That restraint signaled acceptance. And acceptance, in royal terms, is a concession. Behind closed doors, advisors reportedly began re-examining how early public exposure shapes royal children long-term. The conversation wasn't loud, but it was serious. William's childhood was mentioned more than once. The strain, the lack of agency, the emotional cost paid years later. No one wanted history repeating itself in real time. Catherine's influence in these discussions grew, not because she demanded it, but because her approach had proven effective. Her children were confident, grounded, and emotionally articulate in ways rarely seen at that age within royal life. Charlotte's quiet certainty had become evidence. For Camilla, the realization carried its own weight. She had spent decades navigating a palace that once refused to adapt for her. She understood what it meant to be out of step with the emotional current of the institution. So she adjusted, not publicly, not performatively, but internally. Those close to her say she became more cautious around the Wales children, more observant, less directive, not out of resentment, but recognition, because pushing now would only deepen the distance. Charles, watching all of this, reportedly came to a sobering understanding. His reign would not be defined by command, but by accommodation. The monarchy he inherited was not the one he now led. It was softer, more scrutinized, and less tolerant of emotional misalignment. Charlotte's moment had revealed that clearly, and so, without announcements or acknowledgments, the hierarchy subtly reshaped itself. The Wales family moved closer to the center. Children's comfort became policy, not preference. And authority began to look less like instruction and more like listening. What makes this moment resonate isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of restraint. No one lost, yet everyone adjusted. An adjustment is how institutions survive. Charlotte will grow older. She will attend more engagements. She will one day stand confidently in spaces that currently feel too heavy. But when she does, it will be because she chose readiness, not because readiness was imposed. That distinction matters, because it suggests a future monarchy shaped less by expectation and more by consent, less by symbolism and more by sincerity. All of this from a moment that never made a headline. A child saying no, a mother saying yes, an institution listening. History often focuses on coronations, declarations, and public turning points. But the real shifts, the ones that endure, usually happen quietly. In sitting rooms, in early mornings, in conversations no one hears. And sometimes they begin with the smallest voice in the room, a voice that didn't seek power, but revealed it. What followed in the weeks after wasn't chaos, it was calibration. Inside royal households, calibration is the phase no one outside ever sees. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't correct anything publicly. It simply adjusts pressure points until friction eases. And after Charlotte's refusal, pressure points were everywhere. According to palace insiders, scheduling meetings began to sound different. Questions were asked that hadn't been asked before. Not can she attend, but should she? Not how will this look, But how will this feel? Those distinctions may seem minor, but inside an institution built on optics, they represent a philosophical shift. Catherine's role in this evolution became increasingly visible, though never overt. She didn't push memos. She didn't issue demands. She simply remained consistent. When discussions drifted toward symbolism, she brought them back to her children's reality. When conversations leaned toward tradition, she reminded aides of timing. "Readiness isn't a schedule," she reportedly said during one private exchange. "It's a state." That sentence circulated quietly. William, too, found himself viewed differently. For years, he had been seen as the bridge between old monarchy and new.com, reliable, measured. But now, advisors began recognizing something else: resolve. He would not trade his children's emotional safety for institutional comfort. Not privately, not publicly, not ever. That certainty altered how others behaved around him. Meanwhile, Camilla's recalibration continued in parallel. Those close to her say she began reassessing how her presence was perceived by the younger generation, not in terms of approval ratings or public affection, but proximity. Distance, when chosen wisely, can preserve relationships better than forced closeness. So she allowed it. There were no cold shoulders, no visible strain, just a respectful widening of space. Fewer moments of physical guidance, less symbolic pairing, more neutrality. It was subtle, but subtlety is where royal power actually lives. Charles, perhaps more than anyone, understood the long arc of what was happening. He had lived through decades of emotional rigidity inside the palace. He had watched what happened when children were absorbed into duty too early. And now, as King Therese, he was witnessing a different approach unfold under his reign. One that didn't weaken the monarchy, one that humanized it. And that realization mattered, because it Charlotte's moment, not as a challenge to authority, but as a test of adaptability. And adaptability, not control, is what determines survival in the modern era. Publicly, nothing changed. Privately, everything did. The Wales children became less symbolic and more individual. Appearances were spaced with intention. Their presence felt chosen, not required. Commentators began noting something else, too. Charlotte looked lighter, more present, less aware of expectation, and that, perhaps, was the most telling outcome of all. Because when a child's comfort improves after a boundary is honored, it confirms the boundary was necessary. No palace statement could say that more clearly. As spring advanced and the royal calendar filled once again, this episode faded from immediate relevance. New stories took over. New moments captured attention. But inside the institution, the memory remained not as a controversy, as a reference. Whenever questions arose about involving the next generation, someone would quietly recall the winter morning when silence spoke louder than ceremony, and decisions would be made accordingly. Charlotte didn't know she had changed anything. She didn't need to. She had been protected. That was enough. But protection, once demonstrated, becomes expectation, and expectation reshapes systems. This is how power moves in modern monarchy, not through commands, through alignment, through understanding when to step forward and when to step back. The crown didn't slip that winter. It adjusted its weight, and in doing so, it revealed something the institution rarely admits aloud, that the future isn't led by those who speak the loudest. Sometimes it's guided by those who know when to say no and are finally allowed to mean it. There was one more consequence that few inside the palace expected. Trust began to shift. Not publicly, not ceremonially, but in the way decisions were quietly deferred, in the way certain voices were consulted first, in the way Catherine's instincts began carrying more weight than briefing notes. For years, royal structure relied on hierarchy. Seniority spoke. Tradition guided. Younger members followed. But after Charlotte's refusal, a different order emerged, one based less on rank and more on proximity to reality. Catherine understood her children in ways no committee ever could. That understanding became currency. When advisors debated future engagements, they increasingly looked to her for cues. Not because she demanded authority, but because she had proven something the institution struggled to. Measure emotional accuracy. That shift unsettled some traditionalists. The monarchy had survived centuries by suppressing emotion, not centering it. Yet public sentiment had changed. Audiences no longer admired endurance, alone. They respected awareness. Charlotte's moment had aligned the palace with that reality. Camilla, too, recognized the change. According to those close to her, she became more deliberate about how she occupied shared spaces, not withdrawn, not resentful, just mindful.